You're listening to Protecting What Matters, a podcast by the Ohio Department of Commerce. Commerce is Ohio's chief regulator, and we play a vital role in keeping you safe by protecting your property, your money, and some of the products you use every day. This podcast is designed to bring awareness to important issues and help educate consumers and businesses. Join us as we chat with trusted industry experts focused on providing you with the tools you need to help you protect what matters most in your life.
So right now we're seeing a huge uptake in scams, particularly the romance scam and those type of scams, because they're taking advantage of people who are home alone and afraid.
Sure.
Afraid of the pandemic, afraid of getting sick. So there was also fraudsters selling fake cures and different things. So what we're seeing as Ohio opened back up, we found them, because that's just it. These folks, and this is why this conversation is so important, is because older Americans typically don't call for help when this is happening.
Welcome to Protecting What Matters, a podcast by the Ohio Department of Commerce. I'm Dan Orzano, and with the Ohio Division of Securities as the Outreach and Education Manager. And with me today is Sylvia Plow-Wraith. She's Director of the Elder Justice Unit in the Consumer Protection Section of the Ohio Attorney General's Office. Welcome, Sylvia. I've known Sylvia for a number of years. We work together on a number of initiatives on protecting elders in Ohio, specifically on the financial side. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that today as far as some of the work that Sylvia's group does along with us. And we're doing this in the capacity of this being Older Americans Month. And so it's a time really where we do year-round a lot of work in that, but we want to specifically focus on older Americans this month in a variety of ways. So this was an opportunity to bring Sylvia in and hear about some of the things they do from both the Elder Justice Commission as well as the Elder Justice Unit, because obviously it's a major area of work on her part and a number of other parts. I mean, we don't do this in a vacuum. There's a lot of people involved in that.
Absolutely.
So Sylvia, can you give us just kind of a brief overview of the commission, kind of how it came about,
Sure.
Who's involved in it, and just kind of a brief overview of that. And we'll talk a little bit more about some of the specific things that your area does as well.
Thanks, Dan, and thank you so much for having me here today. I really appreciate it. I think this is really important to talk about ways in protecting older adults, and in some ways we just don't do enough, so I'm very grateful to be here. The Elder Abuse Commission actually was initiated back in 2009, so it's been a while. It actually predates you and I. I was in another field entirely. But the then Attorney General was Dan Cordray, took advantage of a task force that took place in 2005, looking at Ohio laws, and there was a movement that felt that we needed like an advisory board to help push things along. So what's nice about the commission is that we are basically put in place to raise awareness about elder abuse, looking at legislation, moving policy, looking for funding. But we don't have to worry about moving, we don't have any regulatory responsibilities. So it's really important. That's really about creating a forum. So what got us going is that we really looked at Ohio APS, Adult Protective Service law in Ohio, and really compared it with other states. So the legislation that codified the commission was actually introduced way back in 2009 as the Ohio Elder Justice Act. And it was reintroduced several times. As you know, passing legislation takes a long time, but it really gave us the teeth and actually impacted. It took 10 years to pass, but it eventually created some teeth to the Adult Protective Service law in Ohio, but it codified the commission and its membership, which requires us to meet on a regular basis. And so, and that's how we came to be.
And there's a number of both state agencies and other organizations that are members of the commission. Right. And so we're one of them, Department of Commerce. And a lot of that is, again, because of the work that we do, in our area in terms of elder protection, specifically in financial services and investing and things like that, which is, we know that seniors continue to be a major target of fraud for a variety of different reasons. And so by working with your organization and connecting with other like organizations, it helps expand the work that we're all doing and sharing in that that effort. And the more that we do, the better off we all are.
And you get that common voice. I agree with you.
Exactly.
Because actually, I think the commission has membership from just about every state organization that has something to do with older adults, from the Department of Aging, Jobs and Family Services, but we also have law enforcement. So we have the Ohio Prosecutors Association, we have the Chief of Police. So what I like about the commission is that because one of the things we're trying to do is define things and connect the different systems. So by coming and talking, we can identify a little easier where the gaps are, and then what kind of resources do we need to throw at it to try to reduce the gaps, or if we need to create laws or funding, which is why I think all of us are very much working on education. And I think what's effective to me is that we're really working on a common voice. And I know it's working because of all the changes at legislation we've seen in the last 10 years to strengthen the Adult Protective Service law. There's more funding that's been put aside for that. And it really has us looking at how can we work together. And I'm seeing it. And I'm seeing us move faster than I have in my whole professional career.
I mean, a good example of that is the mandatory reporting law, which there's been various times when that's been revised and improved, and seeing areas that might need to be followed up on. But that's example where we've our licensees and I know a lot of other folks we're now part of that mandatory reporting law, so that if they suspect there's some kind of abuse, it could be financial, it could be other things, that there's a mandate to report that to Job and Family Services.
There is, and you're right. It happened in 2018, and there was an additional. It was a lot. It was 16 professionals. I think Ohio right now has a very, very strong mandatory reporting law, and again, I think between that and the expansion of the definition of exploitation, because at one point the exploiter had to be a caretaker, and then what we're really learning and know is that the person who oftentimes is the exploiter or the person taking advantage is not necessarily the caretaker. They're exploiting a relationship. So it could be a granddaughter or a neighbor or someone who they're befriending their friends, and the older adult wants, because they're trusting and they want help. It's very common. They want to help folks. They're taking advantage of that relationship to take the money. So I'm glad they made that addition, but I do know that because of that law being expanded and all the mandatory reporting, we're seeing a lot more, and the pandemic, because during the pandemic, we were telling folks to stay at home safely. I was just talking about this the other day at an event, that people who were connected to their social networks, they were connected to the church, the senior center, their groups, that's actually a way of protecting themselves from being exploited.
Sure.
You told them to go home to be safe, and so you cut them off from their network, and now they're home, and guess who found them?
Yeah, the fraudsters.
The fraudsters who are pretending to be their boyfriend and girlfriend or their grandson or granddaughter.
Right.
So right now we're seeing a huge uptake in scams, particularly the romance scam and those type of scams, because they're taking advantage of people who are home alone and afraid.
Sure.
Afraid of the pandemic, afraid of getting sick. So they were also there was also fraudsters selling fake cures and different things. So what we're seeing as Ohio opened back up, we found them, because that's just it. These folks, and this is why this conversation is so important, is because older Americans typically don't call for help when this is happening. They're embarrassed that it happened. They tend to blame themselves. They think that if they tell their family member, they're not, they're going to think there's something wrong with them, or maybe now I'm going to lose my independence, and maybe you're going to put me in a nursing home because so the situations typically get worse before they get better. And so they typically don't tell us, but even with all these mandatory reportings, I'm pretty sure that we have an underreporting problem. And I think it's important for us to be talking about this today, because first of all, we want to normalize it. We want to make sure and people realize that if you fall victim to fraud, it's not because it's your fault. It's because the bad guy took advantage of you. And we need to change that and approach it to help people. We want to make them feel comfortable. But we also need to let them know where the phones, who to call and how they can access help. Because
get assistance, yes.
Because it just gets bigger.
Can you give us a sense of what the problem is? I mean, how many cases that are out there, how many calls you get, and how many people we think are victimized every year. And to your point, it's probably underreported. But can you give us some statistics around that?
But I can tell you from working with Jobs and Family Services, excuse me, that in the fiscal year of 2021, they received over 30,000 reports of abuse, neglect, and exploitation. Of those 30,000+, over 8,000 were just exploitation cases. So that seems like a big number. But I'm going to make it bigger for you.
Yep.
Okay? Because I just told you it's underreported. When I was a young social worker, we used to say it was 1 in 5 got called in. Now we're saying, this is the part that's staggering, is that it's as high as 1 in 43 case gets called in. So if you just take Ohio in 1 year, and so if I just told you 8,000, if you multiply that times 42, we would have over 300,000 cases just here in 1 year.
It's staggering.
It's horrible.
Yeah, it's staggering.
It's staggering. But it's so the problem's getting bigger because people are living longer, so they have longer lives, and older adults are targeted more so. Anyone can be frauded. We all know that.
We know that,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah. Anyone. But we know that older adults tend to be targeted more because, first of all, they're home. So and they tend to have landlines. And so that's a red flag if you have a landline. But because they're home, they're isolated, they're vulnerable to be deceived into relationships that aren't real relationships. And those are hard for family members to understand. So those are all vulnerabilities that could make them easy targets. And then you've got the fact that if they're getting older, sometimes they develop health problems. So it's hard for them to get out.
Cognitive decline.
And sometimes they do have cognitive decline. So I'm not discounting cognitive decline, but I know the number one risk is isolation. And so,
which is why it made it so much worse during the pandemic.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. But and then the generation that we're dealing with still is a generation of trusted people.
Very much so.
And they were polite.
Yes.
So like hanging up, you don't hang up on someone,
Right.
You have to listen to them. And so I have family members trying to, talk to their older relatives, and it's like, first of all, you can't just take, like I remember I had a case where they wanted to take the phone away because that's how the bad guy was calling them. And I'm like, well, now that didn't work too well. And guess what? The bad guy just sent her another phone.
Right.
And so it's situated. So
or
I
they're
said,
getting something in the mail,
Right.
or there's always another way to reach the person
Yeah.
if that's what they really want to do.
right.
And we know also, from some of our working is that with that older population, you also have people who have saved all their lives,
Right.
invested their money because they probably had pensions, which you don't see as much today, but in their day, yes, they had pensions.
Right.
So they have, in some cases, some savings and things, and the bad guys, you go where the money is. It's as simple as that, and they're very good at what they do.
Right.
I use the analogy that, when you worked in a career 40 hours a week for 30 years, you got very good at what you do. Well, that's what the scammers do. It's a full-time job. They're very good at what they do. Some people think they're not going to be scammed, but it happens to the smartest people.
Well, and
sometimes.
actually, when we interviewed some scammers about, that were caught, the trick of the trade, they went after, they actually, because they were interested in your money, they actually went after successful people who had retired because they knew they had the savings. But I've seen, Dan, this is interesting because, with my work, I have seen cases that are after big money, but I've also seen people being defrauded of their Social Security check.
Right.
And then I've seen people defrauded of their good credit because I might not have money, but if you steal my identity, and now I can, get a second mortgage using your name and cars. So I've seen people who don't have a lot of savings either also get victimized. So it's really important that we learn to be safe. So even if you're not online, for instance, but your information is. So our outreach goes. So the Elder Justice Unit is interesting because we don't investigate cases. I have expertise in it because my background was in adult protective services, and before that, I actually spent some time being a community-based social worker. So with that information, I can understand, like when a case is coming in, they're usually calling us is because they fell through the cracks. They tried calling their local adult protective services. They tried calling the police, and sometimes victims get trapped because, especially with exploitation, because is it civil? Is it a civil situation or is it a criminal situation? And I always say, just from looking from the outside looking in, you can't really tell unless you start doing a little bit of digging and looking at from investigation to find out which way it's going to go. Because typically what separates the two is what can you prove? So who took the money? And how did the method they took it? Is it on paper? Is it cash? Or is there a paper trail? Those are, and can you prove it? And can you prove what their intent was? Is how you can figure out whether you're going to be able to build a case from a civil or criminal. So what we end up doing, so when someone calls the Elder Justice Unit, they're looking for help, is usually what we try to do is, I'm going to ask you some more questions, because in Ohio, you have to know a few things about the victim. You have to know how old they are. Because for Adult Protective Services, for instance, you have to be 60 years old. You also have to have vulnerabilities. It's not just based on age. And and then where do they live? Because APS is really designed for community folks. So if the person, how old they are, where do they live? Are they in a community? Are they in an apartment? Are they in a facility or nursing home? That's going to be a whole nother set of professionals. And then who's the bad guy? Is it a family member? Is it a professional? Which is how you and I started working together, because I've learned a lot from the Department of Commerce because you have some pretty tight ways of investigating civil and criminal when the bad guy is someone posing as an investor, or maybe they used to be an investor and then they let their license go. But I found out we've learned by working cases to maximize the resources here. And I know your office and my office work closely together when they're investigating some cases that involve a potential fraudster that's either an investor or
a licensee or a previous licensee or never been a licensee. And you're right. There's so many variables involved when it comes to these cases. They're not necessarily simple. You really have to do some digging and some investigation before you can determine if it's something you can do. And again, from our standpoint, it's very similar. When it's specific to a securities fraud, doesn't fall under the statutes and what we're able to do. Can you talk a little bit about for the average Ohioan that may be listening to this, if they suspect something's going on either with themselves or a family member, how do they look into resources? What resources might be available to them? What would be a starting point, I guess, for people if they suspect there's a problem with again a family member, or maybe it's themselves and they again just don't know where to start?
Well, so there's a couple good resources. I mentioned our office, but I know that we work closely with Adult Protective Services, and they've recently created an 800 number that people can call. You call this number, but it's going to take you back to the county. So the way Ohio works, you're going to probably want to start with your local resources first. And if that doesn't work, most of the state organizations can't undo what's been. So that's why I reconnect people. But Jobs and Family Services, that number is 1-855-6446-277. But what I like, it'll ask you information, because you need to be able. The law depends on where the older adult lives. So it's not where I live, because sometimes family members want, and so no, it's based on where they're at. So, and then the other good resource is the Ohio Department of Aging. They have, a lot of people are familiar with the Passport program or MyCare, but they actually can come out and do a community-based assessment. But, because we have a good relationship with them, because basically I say the Department of Aging helps with the preventative care. But then it's also the same services that sometimes we need them if we find out there's a problem and we're looking for wraparound services. We tend to turn to them as well, because you're trying to stabilize the situation in terms of how to build socialization or supervision. Maybe they need adult day, different ways that you can protect that individual. But we use them a lot. They also have an 800 number. You can call the Department of Aging at 1-800-282-1206.
Okay.
And the last number that I like a lot, and I use a lot, is that sometimes people call the Attorney General's offices because they think we can be their attorney. And we cannot. Because sometimes a civil attorney is helpful in undoing a bad deed or a bad improper power of attorney. So sometimes you need a legal advice. So the other good resource that we have in Ohio is Pro Seniors, that has a free legal hotline that any Ohioan, because they're based in Cincinnati, but by calling them, they can help you determine if you need an attorney and also give you some referrals. Because again, I can't be your attorney, but they can.
Right.
So the Pro Seniors is 1-800-488-6070.
Okay.
So those are the top 4 that I have, but we've thrown a lot of information, and like I said, we're kind of navigators, so the Elder Justice Unit is really good if you have an individual case and you're feeling stuck. I think we can help you figure out what would be in your best, what agency would be the best for that situation.
Yeah. What are some things, as far as tips and suggestions you would have for listeners as far as, how they can spot potential abuse, potential fraud? What are some of the things that you tell people? Here are the things you need to look at, whether it's, again, the individual or, as we said earlier, we're also training the Adult Protective Services folks. What would be some examples of things that you would tell people to look for from a prevention standpoint, if possible?
Thank you for asking that, because I think that's a good way to end, is on a positive. Because I think, first of all, check in on your family members. Check in on them. Don't just call them. Because calling them, they're going to tell you they're fine. Because they don't want to upset you. They don't want to make you worried. So they're going to tell you you're fine, but that doesn't mean they're fine. So checking in on them is really important. As people get older, their social network tends to shrink. So one of the things we tell older adults themselves is it's important to reach out and have friends in different age groups and not just, and make new friends and staying involved and getting involved in new activities. The other thing we tell people is plan ahead. A lot of good things happen when documents are done in time, like if you are planning out your power of attorney or advance directives, doing things like that early on when you can make decisions about who you trust and who's going to take care of you. So you want to plan ahead. Don't wait for the emergency. Too many of us wait till there's an emergency and then it's too late. You also want to do your homework. So if you're going to be getting any work done at the house, or if you're going to get at least 3 estimates. Ask your friends, word of mouth, get some references. Never, ever, ever, ever just accept help from someone who's knocking on your door that's been unsolicited. Don't ever accept help from someone who calls you that you didn't give them your number. So it's real important to get educated about what kind of scams are available. So I know my office, we have a great resource of ohioprotects.org, and I know you have a lot of educational information. There's lots of ways of us to get involved, to get information of what are the latest scams so you can protect yourself, but educate your family members. Like the grandparent scam is a good one. We tell folks a lot of these scammers will go after that because they know the grandparent wants to help their grandkid, and it's almost like they're smitten that they called them for help and not their parents. And then it's like, oh, you're calling me? But to teach them that it's a scam is a good way to keep them from happening it. But also, like if somebody, a code, like ask a question that's not
that they wouldn't know.
That they wouldn't know, because that's a nice way to see if you can educate them. But it's real, the literature is real important for them, because I know I was just talking about yesterday, when to get people educated, it's the chances it avoids the exploitation, or it helps them realize it's scam and they're going to get help faster. So having conversations about this before it happens is good. But when it does happen, I think getting the information is just as critical, so you can try to educate your older adult in your family that this is a scam, and don't just tell them that, and don't tell them they're stupid, because it's going to actually re-victimize them, and It's going to get them not to listen to you, but to try to support them. Hey, this isn't about you. This is about the bad guy. But literature can help them understand that this is it's fake. Again, and then get for help. But those are just some of the things that we do, and be persistent.
Yeah.
And because we're going to tell you if it happens, yes, get rid of the phone that got the phone that got infected, as I say, because now a bad guy's going to have that number. It's a bad number. If the accounts have been exposed, you're going to want to change them. There's lots of things that need to happen after it's been done to protect you in the future. And that could be maybe another podcast in the future. You and I can talk more
Absolutely.
about that.
Yeah, no, I think I'd love to do that. I think, we've covered a lot of areas today. There's probably a few things we probably didn't get to because of time, but it just goes to show you there's so much to be done and so many things that are involved in this issue, that we've touched on. So, hopefully we can have you back another time.
Happy to come back, Dan.
And talk some more. I know there's a lot of things that are, on the horizon in terms of what the commission is doing and what your agency is doing, and of course what our agency is doing. So hopefully we'll, continue to have some opportunities to, continue to work together. So I want to thank you for coming and appreciate your time. And we will get back in touch soon.
Thank you, Dan. Appreciate it very much. Happy to come back.
Thank you.